Qibla. Learn, change, inspire.
It's indirect, like questions on happiness, whether it's directly associated to my purpose in life. So, Imam Ali radiallahu anhu mentioned that كل الناس نيام الناس نيام فإذا ماتوا انتبهوا, that people are asleep and it is only when they pass away that they become alert, that they awaken. And whether this is referring to, some people have mentioned it referring to the death of one's ego, which is directly tied to a spiritual effort, right? Some people mention, no, it is just the physical death, and you awaken to the day of judgment, and this is where the action, so to speak, or the seriousness really begins, and you're awakened to. But when one is dreaming, he feels like, yes, he doesn't know that he's in a dreaming state until he awakens. Then he realizes, oh, it was all a dream. Is this what Imam Ali, for example, possibly was referring to? Irrelevant. The awakening we are talking about is awakening to our true purpose in our life, to our ultimate purpose in life. And what does it take? First of all, identifying what that is, and then understanding what it takes to reach that point. So awakening involves taking ourselves to account before we are taking to account. Surah Al-Asr comes to mind because I feel like it brings together all the Islamic sciences. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears, takes an oath on time, the time of Asr, that all humanity is in a state of loss, except those who believe. And I believe this touches upon Aqidah. آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات, doing or acts of righteousness. Doing has something to do with Sharia on some level, and righteousness and acts devoid of sincerity are not accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Has to do with spirituality, and the basis of the ayah, is it's a Quranic ayah, it's revelation. So for all our viewers and students all across the globe, mashallah, we've got students signing in from Germany, from Norway, from Spain, from the United States, from the UK, from Canada, from all across the world. Jazakumullah khair for tuning in. Just to give you an idea, Sheikh Hamza Karamali, although mashallah is able to speak on all aspects, his focus and today's live event will be tackling the spiritual aspect of tonight's question. Sheikh Qais Arthur will be focusing on the Aqidah aspect, and Sheikh Suhail Hanif will be focusing on Quran and Hadith and the revelation aspect. But they all have one thing for sure in common: they all teach fiqh. I believe this to be true. So I've said enough and plenty, mashallah. You are the experts. You're who we're looking to listen to here. There are some questions that arise, and one is like, isn't a good person regardless of religion? Some people are just naturally good. I've had some Christian neighbors, for example, in the West, that were just, mashallah, you think like, he should be a Muslim, mashallah, these akhlaq, the way he goes about, it almost is like, it's too bad they're not Muslim. One of my neighbors was a priest, actually, at one of the churches, and when he wouldn't see me out playing in the neighborhood, he would come and ask about me at home. And I had a lot of love for this person, and he passed away a few years back. Like, goodness versus religion, how do they relate?
So I'll start off, and I'll have inshallah Sheikh Qais will finish. So I think one of the things that helps is to when we're faced with a real life situation, then the details of our lives sometimes distract us from Quranic realities. So it helps over here. I think it helps to step back and put your priest aside, your neighbor aside, to put your all these names that you have in your mind and personalities that you know aside, and just go to the Quran and imagine that there was nothing else except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran. Now when we go to the Quran, we find certain stories, like for example the story of Iblis. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam, and he refused. And his refusal to prostrate when he is commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is takabbur. It's arrogance. It's, according to Imam al-Ghazali, it's the worst form of arrogance. The worst form of arrogance is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you to do something and you go and you turn to him and say, no, I'm not going to do it. We have the story in the Quran of Fir'aun, the tyrant, but the greatest crime of Fir'aun was the genocide that he committed was a tremendous crime, but it stemmed from a greater crime that he committed. And the greater crime that he committed, from which these atrocities stemmed from, was arrogance against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, "Ana rabbukumul a'la." He said, I am your God. So, and when we look at these stories, I think we can see that there's something intrinsically bad about standing up to God and saying no. So, but now when we take this and we bring it into our everyday realities, I think that the difference there's probably a number of differences, but sometimes one of the differences is that the people in question, they may not have seen the light of the truth of revelation, may not have shone as brightly in their faces as it did, for example, to Iblis or to Fir'aun. So that and sometimes that's the case. And when that happens, then that's our fault. That's our fault. So when we look at this situation, instead of saying whether they're okay or not okay, I think we as Muslims, we need to ask ourselves whether at every opportunity, whether we are doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has held us responsible for. And in this case, it would be that we should be means for the light of Islam to shine brightly than all other lights. Inshallah, maybe you can give some.
Barakallah fikum, Shaykh Qais.
There is, and this is a very interesting question, and very often for us to be clear on certain things, we need to contextualize. And very often we speak about context with regard to answers, but context is also important with regard to questions. Very often, in fact, prior to our arriving at an answer. And in our modern context, there are some things that are presupposed with that question, right? So isn't a good person regardless of their religion? Supposes a certain understanding of religion. And this is something that I try to tackle in my belief classes. Yeah. Are we going to understand deen in an anthropological sense? As you know, it's an object of study. It's one sphere of human life that's meant to fit into so many other things. Or are we going to understand religion the way that religion defines itself, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about deen in the revelation?
No.
And so, if we understand that deen is our submission to God physically, our submission to God mentally, our consciousness, awareness, awakened state, if you will, with our hearts. If we understand this is what deen is, this is what religion is, worshipping God, submitting to God, being conscious about the reality of our existence, then you say, what you're asking is, can a good person be a good person without being conscious of God, without worshipping God, without knowing the reality of a situation? And then the answer becomes quite clear. Well, that's going to be a bit difficult.
I like the way you twisted that.
So very often it's a matter of awakening ourselves and being conscious. In my part of the world, where I come from, in the Caribbean, consciousness. People talk about being conscious. Are you conscious?
Conscious.
Right?
Sounds highly Jamaican.
So this whole idea of being aware of oneself, aware of one's circumstances, is extremely important to being good and to living properly. And Revelation tells us it's not possible for you to do that unless you are aware of God, first and foremost. Right? No.
So can I just add to that? Which is, I heard once Sheikh Nuh Keller, one of my teachers, relate from his teacher, Sheikh Abdul Wakil al-Durubi, that sincerity is, so these qualities of arrogance and sincerity and humility and pure-heartedness. These are things that everybody can relate to when they talk about good or bad. So sincerity is a good thing. So Sheikh Abdul Wakil, he used to say that sincerity means that when you deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't put people between you and Allah. In other words, your worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not hindered or pushed by what other people think or what other people are saying. It's purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the second part of what he said, of sincerity, he said, and that it's when you deal with people, you don't put your ego, you don't put your nafs in between that. So now what Sheikh Qais said, I think it's very important because when we understand these realities, and we understand the realities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the tremendousness of God, it's in the tremendousness of God that the ego fades away. And it's when the ego fades away in the tremendousness of God, this is when true genuineness comes when you deal with other people. So now with when people don't have a context because they don't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't know the tremendousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're not able to realize to the fullest degree how all of these traits such as genuineness or humility or sincerity, how all of these things are realized in their interactions with daily life. So, but if the light of Islam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to dawn on people, then these questions of good or bad, there's a completely different way of looking at them. That's
Jazakallah khair.
Also, if I can just also
Please.
add that the consequence of this knowledge on the individual is not a consequence of arrogance over those that don't understand this, but rather it's a consequence of sincerely wanting the best for people. And so the message of Islam is not let's all be good. The message of Islam is to realize this light that's come from God is the only light that will give you success in this world and the next. And the consequence of that is we really want it for everyone, because we really see there's nothing like Islam, and there's no solution for people except Islam. If you look at the stories of the prophets within the Quran, they don't come to their people saying, "Oh you kafirs and oh you losers." They say, "Inni lakum nasihun ameen." They say, "I really, really want the best for you. And that's the only reason why I'm arguing with you. That's the only reason why I'm destroying your idols. That's the only reason why I'm coming to your shop and saying, what are you guys doing?"
For your benefit.
Correct. And so this all comes from this conviction that there's no light on the earth except the light that comes from revelation.
MashaAllah.
And this conviction leads to really wanting the best for people, which goes back to Sheikh Hamza's first comment. That we have to spread this, because we really want the best for everyone. And it's not a door to arrogance, but it's a door to really changing the world.
Barakallah feek. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Suhail, for adding that.